And next slide, please. It's been around for a very, very long time in Java. And you also see it in countries throughout the world. You find it in Africa, in India, but in no place other than Indonesia has it been brought to the highest art ethics in Indonesia. And that's why 2 years ago, UNESCO declared it a masterpiece of oral and intangible heritage of humanity, which is a real honor for the artists. The majority of them are women who still work now and have worked for centuries making spectacular textiles. Next slide. And it's not only an old art, it's also a very living tradition. You see festivals celebrating it in Jakarta. You see artists working in it, doing contemporary art today, so it's very much a living tradition. But I'm here to talk a little bit about how it's made, because you see it all over the place, but once you learn what effort goes into making a handmade batik, it's really pretty mind-blowing. Okay. And the batik I'm talking about is a batik called batik tulis, which means it's made by hand, it's written by hand. Today there's other methods where it's made, but this is the traditional method from a long time ago. And it starts out with just a piece generally of cotton, sometimes of silk, which needs to be worked very finely. It has to be prepared so that it's able to accept the wax that it's dyed with. Next step. Often there's someone who first off draws in pencil the design on the cloth. For very, very talented artists, they do it all in their head, but today often someone writes it out in pencil beforehand. The next step involves the wax itself, which is often a combination of beeswax and paraffin, and then it's melted in small little tiny blocks, and then the artists use these very small pens called janting, which they use to dye the pattern on the cloth. And what's unusual about batik is that the pattern that you see is not necessarily what's been drawn in by the artist. They're covering up what you don't want to see. And so it's a very multi-stage process. Next slide. So first, the wax is melted. Often a number of women sit around one of these pots of melting wax. They dip their tool, which is made out of bamboo with a little copper tip, into it, and then they start to draw. Next slide. And these patterns can be incredibly intricate. Some of it might be mapped out with pencil, but often the details are entirely done by hand, done by the memory of women who have been doing this for years and years and years. So they wax the pattern in, and the pattern they're waxing is what they want to remain the color of the cloth. So what they wax will remain white. And then next step. And here you see an example of a cloth that's been waxed. That sort of dark area is the wax that's been applied. And after they do all that, they have to turn it around and retrace that entire pattern on the back of the cloth. And this is just the very early part of the process. After that, next slide, the dye is prepared, and sometimes the dyeing of the cloth is equally as important as the drying of it. Women, textile artists in Indonesia are not only acclaimed for their skills in making textiles, but also their skills in being able traditionally to find the right materials, to have the right recipes, to make rich, deep colors which really would penetrate and stay in textiles. So next slide. The entire cloth with its wax is dipped into a dye. Sometimes to get a rich color, you would do this 8 or 10 times. Next slide, please. Then it's hung to dry. Okay. And then there's a second waxing where they either scrape off the wax if they want that area to be covered, and then they cover up the area that they want to remain the color that was dyed the first time. And so when you see a textile which has many colors, like Huck Edmonds' shirt here, you know that it's been dipped time and time again in a variety of different dye baths. Each time, the artist covering up the areas that have been dyed once, re-dyeing again. Go ahead. And with some batiks, it is the most incredible detail that the mid-1800s, which was primarily done by men rather than women, where copper stamps were introduced, where you could stamp with wax a much larger part of a textile, but then the process would be pretty much the same. Okay. And then after the textile is done, there's sometimes with very special textiles, especially cork textiles, things which are done like the addition of gold in a type of batik called batik product. Next. There are dozens of regional styles of batik. Most people know about those in central Java, but there are many, many others. And people who are very skilled at knowing their textiles can see someone's skirt and immediately know where it was made. Sometimes they're signed, you can know who made it, you might know what period of time it was made. But some of the most famous are from the courts in central Java. So the Yogyakarta style, next, the Surakarta style, these are sort of the high